Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about the response to African Americans, the formation of cities, and also labor unions. So, if you remember during this time, there was a lot of discrimination towards African Americans. A lot of people were racist towards them. And these are just some important African Americans to know. Ida B. Wells Barnett led an anti lynching crusade and called on the federal government to take action. So, she really didn't like lynching and she wanted it to stop and she wanted the government to stop it. Booker T. Washington believed that the way to equality was through vocational education and economic success. He accepted social separation. So for him, he didn't mind that there was separation, as in African Americans went to one school, white people went to another school, but he believed African Americans needed education and they needed to make money. Then Webb Dubois believed that education was meaningless without equality. So he's the opposite. He believed that education doesn't matter, that people need to be equal, not separated. He supported political equality for African Americans, and he formed the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which is lots of times known as the NAACP. And NAACP still exists today, and they help out African Americans. They played an important role in changing the name from Stewart to Justice High School. So we're going to talk about the practice of eugenics in Virginia. And eugenics is the belief in the possibility of improving the qualities of the human population by discouraging reproduction by individuals presumed to have undesirable traits and encouraging reproduction by those who had desired inheritable traits. And eugenics was a movement worldwide as well in Virginia that demonstrated the misuse of the principles of heredity. So what this means is they didn't want certain people to have children. So they would, if you maybe were missing an arm or if you had some type of disability or if you committed a lot of crimes, they would do a surgery. So you're not allowed to have children. You would be sterilized. And in Buck v. Bell, the United States Supreme Court upheld a Virginia statute for the sterilization of people considered genetically unfit. Upholding Virginia's sterilization statute provided for similar laws in 30 states, under which estimated 65,000 Americans were sterilized without their own consent or that of a family member. So sterilized means you're not able to have children. And during this time, the government forced 65,000 people to become sterilized, and they did not consent to it. They didn't want to do it, but the government forced it. And the case that allowed that was Buck v. Bell. So you talked about in the North how it's growing a lot, the economy is doing well, but the cities are growing very fast. And cities such as Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and New York grew rapidly as manufacturing and transportation centers. So this is where all the transportation was, but also manufacturing. If you wanted a job, these were the big cities. And factories in the large cities provided jobs, but workers' families often lived in crowded into tenements and slums. So this would be a slum or tenement right here. It's just a very, very poor apartment complex, essentially. Lots of times there was no electricity. There was only like one restroom, maybe for 50 people, very dirty. So the cities were crowded and they lived in what's called tenements and slums, which are just really bad houses. And the rapid growth of cities caused housing shortages and the need for new public services such as sewage and water systems and public transportation. Cities in the Northeast, such as Boston and New York, constructed subway systems around the turn of the 20th century. And a subway, it's essentially a train that goes underground. That's what the metro is. If you guys ever read the metro. And they needed public services such as sewage. So if you go to the bathroom, where's that water going to go? It has to go somewhere. And there's also water systems because people need water. And many cities built trolley or streetcar lines. So those are they're sort of like trains, but they go across the city so you can move around faster. So I'm going to talk about industrialization, which is what's going on in this period. And it's the reputation of capitalists as captains of industry and robber barons. Robber means to steal. Remember last time we talked about Standard Oil, John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and the steel industry, where they had monopolies. So they can charge whatever they wanted, and people had to pay. So people thought they were stealing. Robber barons is the name given to them. And there was also the excesses of the Gilded Age, income disparity. People were either really rich or really poor. There wasn't a lot of people in the middle. Lavish lifestyles. People had a lot of money, and certain people had money. And ruthless business practices of capitalism and forming monopolies and trusts. So monopoly means one seller. If you want to buy oil, you had to buy from Standard Oil. There was nobody else. That's what a monopoly is, when there's only one seller. And there was impact on working conditions for labor. So there was long hours and low wages, especially for women and children. So women and children got paid very little. Men made a little more, still not very much, but women and children were paid much less and worked long hours. There was no job security and no benefits such as working men's compensation. So if you're working in a factory and your arm fell off or you got hurt and you were sick, you would get fired and you wouldn't get any money. So it was it was dangerous and no security. And the dangerous working conditions included the Triangle Shirtwaist Company fire and work-related illnesses such as lung disease. And the Triangle Shirtwaist Company fire, this is right here. This building caught on fire. They made T-shirts. But back then, they used to lock the doors so people wouldn't take restroom breaks. So you were stuck inside the building and you have to work. But a fire broke out and nobody could escape. So a lot of people burned to death and a lot of people jumped to their death down below. And a lot of people got lung disease. There wasn't a lot of good air in there. Lung disease is when you breathe bad air. And then company towns. Sometimes out in the middle of nowhere, a company would start a town, but they would charge a lot for things like food. But since you live there, you have to buy food. You were forced to pay the company a lot of money for the food, and you're kind of just stuck. So people form labor unions, and a labor union is where all the workers get together, and they form what's called a union. It's just a group. For instance, Fairfax County Teachers Association. It's a union for teachers. If we don't like something, all the teachers can get together. We can talk about it, tell our employees we don't like it. And these are the goals of labor unions. They want higher wages. They want to work fewer hours. And they want safer conditions. And these are some of the important labor unions during that time. There was a lot more, but these are four of the biggest one. There's one called Knights of Labor, which Terence Powderly started. There was one called the American Federation, which it was Samuel Gompers was the leader. An American Railway Union, which Eugene V. Debs was the leader. And International Ladies Garment Workers Union. That was a union for ladies who worked in clothing factories. So a lot of people start going on strike during this time because the working conditions are bad. And a strike is when all of the employees at a factory or somewhere stop working. They go on strike. They say, we're not going to work unless you pay us more. This still happens today. The state of Arizona, actually all of the teachers in Arizona went on strike. West Virginia, the teachers went on strike as well this past year because they said they weren't getting paid enough money. So nobody was going to school. But when you go on strike, a company cannot make money because there's nobody working. And these are some important strikes. There was the Haymarket Square riot, and this led to the demise of the Knights of Labor. So this strike didn't go very well. It led to a riot. A lot of people started fighting, and the labor union Knights of Labor didn't exist anymore. There was the Homestead Strike by Carnegie Steelworkers. Andrew Carnegie had the American Steel Company, but a lot of his workers, they went on strike. And there was the Pullman Strike by railroad workers. Vanderbilt was the one in charge of railroads during this time. But a lot of his workers went on strike. They said, we're not going to work unless you pay us better. And there was some gain. So after all these strikes, hours started going less. A lot of people now work 8 hours a day. Back then, people were working 12, 13, 14, 15 hours a day. There's regulated working conditions. So the government made it so things are safer. And there was also higher wages. People were starting to make more money. If you guys have any questions, let me know.